I'd like to welcome you to the August 16th meeting of the Logan City Council. And I am going to do our opening ceremony, so I will go over to the microphone. I'm doing our opening ceremony in part because I'm so bad at picking people to do this. But also, I missed the last meeting because I took my 12 and 13-year-old grandsons on what I call a grand adventure. We went about 5,000 miles in a car. And we were gone for 2.5 weeks, but we went through national parks, national grasslands, national forests. And so I thought I would read a quote from Theodore Roosevelt. Far better is it to dare mighty things, to win glorious triumphs, even though checkered by failure, than to rank with those poor spirits who neither enjoy much nor suffer much, because they live in a gray twilight that knows not victory or defeat. Teddy Roosevelt established 150 national forests, 51 federal bird reserves, 4 national game preserves, 5 national parks. He is the father of the national park. 18 national monuments. His face is on
Mount Rushmore.
Mount Rushmore, thank you. My brain is like, which we went to visit as well. He dedicated over 230 million acres for public use. And he was also the author of large-scale irrigation projects in the West. So we have a lot to thank him for, whether or not we agree with his politics. And I think that it's important to remember that all of us are responsible for the future of our city, our neighborhood, our county, and that we need to think of what happens 50 years from now, not necessarily what happens tomorrow. And if you will now stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And in case anybody wonders, everybody got along.
That's got to be a miracle.
So now we'll move to the acceptance of minutes and the approval of the agenda for this evening.
I'll move for acceptance of minutes and approval of the agenda, unless Amy says otherwise.
I'll second.
Oh, it's been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? Those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Our regularly scheduled meetings are on the first and third Tuesdays at 5:30. Our next meeting is September 6th. That's very scary to me, but it is the truth.
Is that the day after Labor Day?
It is the day after Labor Day, so don't go far.
I'm not going to go too far.
This is the time in our meeting where we allow questions and comments from the public on any item that is not otherwise on the agenda. If there's anyone who would like to make a comment, please come forward, state your name, and take 2 minutes.
Good evening, council members. My name is David Zook, Cache County Executive. I wasn't planning to do this, but right before you got to this point, I thought, is there a public comment period? I'd like to tell them about something. I've actually talked to a couple of you about this already and to Mayor Daines, but in addition to serving as county executive, I serve on the board for Bear River Mental Health. And they're essentially our behavioral health, mental health department for the county. In the state of Utah, counties are responsible for mental health. But the way that we've decided to approach it is we've partnered with our neighboring counties, Box Elder and Rich counties, and formed Bear River Mental Health that serves all 3 of our counties. One of the projects Bear River Mental Health is working on is what's called a receiving center. And it's a missing link in our continuum of care for mental health and substance abuse health. And It's a very important project. It's something we are working with the state and hoping to have support from the legislature on in this coming session. We feel very confident that we will be successful in securing funds to actually build it. I'd love to come some other time or meet with you individually and tell you more details about what it is. But the reason I just wanted to give you a heads up about it is Bear River Mental Health would be very interested in potentially securing your, what will soon be a former fire station, right next door to Bear River Mental Health, right up the street here. If there's any way Bear River Mental Health could have first right of refusal or have an opportunity to purchase that land and building, we think that might be a good location for this. It's still very preliminary. We haven't decided for sure, but initial thoughts about it, we think that would be a great location for this receiving center. And if we're able to somehow retrofit that building, it could save us a lot of money. So we're not asking for you to give it to us or even for a discount. If you'd like to do that, we'd be happy to accept it. But we're happy to pay whatever the appraised value is. We just would love to be able to work with you on that project. Like I said, just wasn't planning to do this, but I thought I'd take advantage of the opportunity and just tell all of you. I've mentioned this to a couple of you already. And I'd love to give you more details if you'd like to meet with me later on.
Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Is there anyone else? Okay, we will move now to the mayor's staff reports, and the mayor is on the phone. Would she like to run this particular part of the meeting or delegate it to someone else?
And I am here listening, but given that I am far away in northern Idaho at our cabin, I will ask Craig to just do the reappointment for the Planning Commission.
All right, we have one appointment for the Planning Commission today. Royland Croshaw, I think he's here. Royland, if you wouldn't mind standing. Royland's been serving on the Planning Commission for how long? 4 years. 4 years. Okay, so this is a reappointment for Royland, and I'm just going to ask for a vote ratifying this appointment.
Do I have a motion?
I will move because I believe he's done a good job, but I've known his character and his professional abilities for a long time. So I would move ratification.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, Roland. Thanks for continuing to be on the Planning Commission. Any other items, Mayor Daines?
No, I will be listening, but that is all I had on the agenda for tonight. Thank you.
Okay. I hope you're having wonderful, I hope it's a little cooler there.
It's toasty, but I just got out of swimming in the lake, so that was awesome.
Yeah, I bet now you're cool, right?
Right.
Okay, we'll move now to council business. And the first item on our business is a report from the Affordable Housing Task Force, and Sandy Goodlander will be taking charge of that report, and we'll turn the microphone over to her.
Thank you, council members and Mayor Daines from North Idaho. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you about this tonight. The very first thing I want to do is to correct the title. It is not the Affordable Housing Task Force. It was the Housing Crisis Task Force.
Oh.
So just semantics, but just so that you know, that's what we were tasked with.
I just read it.
I know. That's fine. So, in April of this year, Executive Zook commissioned a task force of people to gather together and try and see what we could do about the housing crisis here in Cache Valley and some of the problems that people are having. And the leaders were set to be John Drew, the former mayor of Providence, Sean Milne, our county community development, I have to read this one to say it right, the Economic Development Director, and Karina Brown, who was a policy analyst for the county. And so they were the leaders. And the group that we got together was a very diverse group. We have a PowerPoint presentation that you were all sent. I'm gonna use some of it. So this might be a little awkward, but if you want to go ahead and go to the very first. Yep, there we are. Those are the people that were in charge. And so, and if you'll go to the next one too, please. So there was a lot of diversity in this group. There were developers from real estate. There were a lot of private citizens, elected officials, people from Utah State, different educators. It was a very diverse group of people trying to get a lot of different opinions about what we can do to address the problems that we're having. And one of the first things that we determined was that we needed more data, that we just didn't have enough data to make decisions. So we split into subgroups, and each group was given a different area of focus, and they studied different things and came back together, and this is the final report, and I'm really honored that I get a chance to present this to you. One of the most interesting data points that we came up with was that in between 2010 and 2020, that the last decade of the census, Cache Valley was increased by approximately 25,000 members. And of that 25,000, 85% of it was our own children and grandchildren. The idea that there's just so many outside people moving in is kind of not true. It's a wonderful place to live, and we all want our families to be here. And so a lot of that is just growth within. And so that was really interesting to us. And we also want to, are you talking to me? Oh, sorry.
No, I'm just asking if they can advance.
Oh yeah, go ahead and advance the slide past that. One more. Okay, one. Okay, there's a chart. One more. There it is. Okay, so this gives a lot of data, and I'm not going to go over all of it, but one of the other interesting things is that in the same decade, home prices increased 78%. And if you add in 2020 to 2022, if you add in that second 2 years, it was 185%. So house prices have just grown so tremendously. And in 2022, the Milken Institute said that Logan, they determined that Logan was the #1 performing small community in the country, but we're 178th as far as housing availability. And so the situation that we have is there is an extreme shortage of housing across all socioeconomic levels. It's not just for the lowest income. Even higher income people, a lot of times the only thing that's available are the homes that would have been purchased by people who maybe could only afford those. And so that housing shortage kind of filters down to everybody. Many people could not afford to buy the homes that they live in right now. But the housing prices have gone up so much. And more than 75% of families between the age of 25 and 45 are almost completely priced out of the housing market. So things are kind of not looking great. And there's a lot of different reasons that affect that. But one of the bottom lines is the main way that we're going to increase that availability and make things better is through higher density housing. And that causes a whole scope of different feelings and different myths and ideas of people around our community. And so there's a slide that says housing myths. So these graphs, you can all look at them, they'll be online. Okay, housing crisis myths. This is some of the things that we found out from people. People think, yeah, it's a great idea. Let's make more affordable housing if it has to be higher density, but not in my backyard. And I know that you guys have been privy to some of that. That happens in your meetings. Some people think it should only be in Logan. Let's keep all the high density in Logan. And that's not really fair either. And the other ideas are that higher density brings crime and will reduce the cost of my homes. And those things are refuted by multiple studies. And a lot of those studies are included at the end of this presentation if you want to study some of those further. So younger people, one of the other things we found out is that younger people don't necessarily want to live the same way that we live. This was kind of an eye-opener to me, that some of the younger people said, I don't want 1/4 of an acre or 1/3 of an acre with a big house. My husband and I both work. We have 2 kids. When we get off work, we want to play with our kids or have fun. We don't want to spend all of our time and money taking care of a property. And so a lot of the people that were on the task force are kind of in more my age demographic. And so it was like, that was a mind shift, that some of the younger generation don't want what we have, maybe. And some might, but we need to kind of shift our focus and shift our ideas so that we can meet the needs of our younger families growing up. So the task force recommendations, if you'll go to the recommendations. Okay, there was some for the federal government. We can't do anything about that. There was state government, county government, and then there was cities. And the cities is the one I wanted to focus on tonight because you are Logan City. And the first one is to adopt a citywide general plan with development philosophies that emphasize housing varieties to reduce the cost of living. Logan does that. With my time on the Planning Commission, I recognize that Logan is a real leader there, that they have a general plan, and there are many housing zones that allow for multifamily housings. However, this presentation was given in Hyde Park last week, the city of Hyde Park does not allow any multifamily housing or any high-density housing. So there is a real education that needs to happen within our valley so that we can all work together to make this happen. Number 2 on that list was to educate city councils, planning commissions, and citizens on housing issues. And that's part of what I'm doing here. We plan to give this presentation. Different people have been assigned to give it all over the valley to different municipalities to kind of make sure that everyone has the same information and that we can all work together to try and find solutions. Some of the things that Logan City could do is help with the education. You guys have a big pulpit. Social media, your newsletters, your different organizations that you have underneath the city government. If they were all aware of these different issues and some of the findings that we have, then they might be able to educate their neighbors. And it's kind of going to have to be something that takes some time, but we need people to understand where we're at and what needs to happen so that we can move forward. Another one is jobs. The jobs and housing go hand in hand. Through studying our task force and some of the different people that came to us, we found different companies that maybe wanted to relocate here but couldn't find housing for their people, or they wanted to expand but they couldn't find affordable housing. And so we want to make sure that people understand that if we want our families to stay here, they have to have jobs. And in order to have jobs, there was one employer who said, I had 4 good paying jobs with benefits. I put out the net. I found 4 people. I interviewed. They were great. They were going to take the job, and all 4 of them turned it down because they came here and couldn't find a place to live for their families. So it's affecting our employers. It's affecting Utah State. I know that President Cockett has expressed the same thing, that sometimes she has trouble finding the quality people she wants because they can't find a place to live. So the third one on this list is to enact zoning code reform to eliminate restrictions that inhibit the development of a variety of housing types. Logan already does that, and I'm quite aware that Logan's zoning codes allow for a lot of that. But there are a few things, suggestions that come along with that too, that you might want to consider. One of them is obviously education. You have a lot of the public that comes before you, and they have a lot of opinions. You know, there might be an opportunity to educate them and to help people understand what some of the data is. Work with Utah State. Perhaps there's a way that USU could expand its campus residential zone or use some more of its property to build more affordable housing. Campus housing is so expensive, and that pushes students into the smaller homes where they can rent 12 to a house or whatever they feel like they can afford. And so if there were more affordable USU housing available for the students, that might open up more smaller homes for beginner families. So these are just some big ideas, but ideas to consider that maybe as you talk with in your group, that maybe those things could be considered. And maybe think of incentives to help builders be able to offer more affordable options, and I know that we are already doing some of that too. So the fourth one on that talks about designate open spaces. And most of you are probably aware there's a group in the county right now that is studying open spaces here in Cache Valley. And they just got approved with the county council a couple of weeks ago to present a bond to the community to see if people are willing to pay a little extra they're trying to raise $20 million, and they want to designate open spaces and to protect some of our open spaces. They haven't got all the details yet, but in their initial polling of people, they found that most people, I think it was over 90% of the citizens they polled, were optimistic and said, yes, I would pay an extra $40 a year on my property taxes if we could preserve some of the open spaces in Cache Valley. So we've got two things. We need more housing and more high-density housing that's affordable, but we want to preserve the open spaces and the culture that we all love in Cache County. So those are hard. Sometimes those are hard, but I think we can do it. I think by talking about it now, in 20 years we'll look back and think, I hope that we can look back and think we got it right instead of doing it kind of a hodgepodge. And I also know that the county is working on a general plan. Logan City has a general plan. The county is working on a general plan. If we can work together with the 19 municipalities within Cache County to work together and have everybody on board, you know what, we're all going to have to give a little and make it so that we have room for our families. Right now, the task force is in the process of presenting these findings to individual city councils around the valley. But next we hope to take it a little bit broader and maybe get more input from young people or people from the community that are at Utah State, or get more information about what people really want so that we can include that in our findings. And our task force model is currently being adopted by the Utah Land Institute. The work that we did, they were really impressed and they would like to take it on a statewide level. And so some of the leaders of our task force are actually helping with the state to do the same kind of thing on a state level, because it's not just Cache County. And so I would like to close with a big thank you to John Drew, Sean Milne, and Karina Brown. They've done an excellent job in putting all this together. I want to give a special shout out to Dr. Damon Can from USU, who helped do a lot of the polling and pulling together some of the data. And with that, I would open up for questions. And if you have a question, I promise to find somebody who can answer it. And also, if you have any suggestions, this group is pretty well organized and they're not done. So if you have suggestions and you think of things that could be done to help, we would love to hear that. And so thank you for your time.
So Sandy, I'll ask you a question, and did you all talk about resources with respect to housing? Because water is a limiting factor in this valley.
We didn't, as far as I know, we didn't really go over that in depth, but it's a huge deal, because if you put houses that are in the county, like in the unincorporated parts of the county, there's sewer and septic. Like there is no, or there's septic and wells. So that would have to be a major portion. And I'd love for John Drew to come up and answer that question.
So, Madam Chair, to answer your question, we did talk about water. One of the things we spent a lot of time talking about was higher density housing, which is anything other than single family homes. When you go to higher density, there's less city infrastructure. When you've got higher density duplexes, condos, townhomes, you use less water. I mean, on a per family basis, on a per capita basis. So if we're going to grow, we grow denser and we grow up rather than taking up green space. Because if you've got single family homes on a quarter-acre lot, like we have a lot of in Providence where I live, that takes up significantly more water than a development that's mixed type of housing. So we did spend a fair amount of time on water.
It does depend on scale.
I'm sorry?
It does depend on scale, but.
It does.
No, and I also meant when I talked about resources, I mean electricity. And I mean, the electric grid right now in Logan anyway is max, it's pretty stretched. And I know Utah Power and Light is desperately trying to maintain everything for everybody, but it's also being struck by the level of growth. And I don't know how you can plan for that or how you can make that, but all those resources seem to me to have to factor into long-term decisions.
Mm-hmm. So Madam Chair, just from my perspective in Providence, we have council members who believe that all high-density growth should be in Logan, belongs in Logan. They've said it publicly.
Lovely.
Yeah, I know, and we had a referendum basically undid what the council did 2 years ago. And that was a mixed-use, higher density housing development, but yes.
So I just want to make sure that, those things are being weighed into that planning process. That's all.
So I know in our city, we have water, we have a lot of water in Providence. We have an enormous amount of water. We have water rights, we have water shares, we have more than adequate storage. I do know some cities in this valley, they did run into problems over the past several years, and they did have to ration. But that's also because the voters said we don't want to add to our capacity, because if we add to our storage capacity, that means we can approve more development. And it was a conscious decision
But I think
to
that,
put a lid on that.
I do think that the water master plan for Cache County does indicate that in the next 20 to 50 years, there's going to be more than a few towns at a minimal growth rate that are going to be very tight on water, if not out, at some points in the year. So I just think all of that needs to factor in. I'm not saying it needs to change anything, but it just needs to be part of the process.
So I don't know how, if you picked up on what Sandy said, we as a community here in Cache Valley, between census 2010 and 2020, 86% of the growth was families having families and grandkids. On the Providence Council, we've got one council member with 9 kids, one with 6 kids, one with 4 kids, one with 5 kids, and a fellow that's 75, he's got 20-some grandkids. So we're producing a lot of children here. So we need to address and deal with the problem.
I agree.
It's an engineering problem.
On that topic too, I was just curious as to whether there's an intention as you move forward with this to incorporate master transportation planning with this too. If we're recommending, density, how is that overlaying with the transportation plan for the county? I know that was just recently worked on, but I would think that would be kind of critical information, especially for the outlying communities that, how do you get people to and from? I know for Logan, since so much of that traffic goes through us.
So
As we look at how the county's going to grow, how are we going to accommodate moving people from jobs to homes, et cetera?
Not all through Main Street.
Not all through the especially the In-N-Out Burger opening tomorrow.
It's now on Second East.
so on the way here, I left Providence, and it was bumper to bumper, and I mentioned it to one of our guys here and said, "You mean from coming through the canyon, coming up from Ogden?" I said, "No, coming up from Providence." Yeah. It was bumper to bumper. So finally, I turned left, got on 100 East over here, and got here at a decent time. But
Well, there was an accident.
leave 20 minutes before to get to City Hall here.
Yeah, there was an accident.
Yeah,
So.
it wasn't that way when we moved here
Oh, I
16
know.
years ago.
I know. Yeah, David, you want to say something?
Hold on.
Yeah, I was just going to respond to what actually both of those questions. Almost the exact same question came up at the Hyde Park Council last week, Councilmember Anderson, about planning in relation to transportation and overall county-wide planning as far as where the housing is going to go. One of the projects that we're actually working on right now with the CMPO is a county-wide transportation plan. I think you were referencing a county transportation plan that we've been working on for all of the county infrastructure, county roads. But last year, the CMPO gave the county about $150,000 to go out and hire an engineering firm to then plan everybody's transportation network, or do a plan that would incorporate everybody's transportation plan. So this plan will take Logan's transportation master plan and the transportation master plan from the county and all of the other cities and incorporate them together. I think a natural next step for that, and something that maybe the CMPO could also be involved in, because they are the Cache Metropolitan Planning Organization, and even though they've historically focused on transportation, it is within their jurisdiction to plan other things like housing. So I think a next natural step to that could be looking beyond the transportation master plan and into housing planning and where that housing could go. I just wanted to mention, Madam Chair, your question about resources, specifically water. We know that the thing that we need to do is conservation. If we're ever going to have enough water to grow and to support our future growth, we have to conserve and we have to be efficient. So efficiency and conservation are the solution. And as Mayor Drew mentioned, density usually helps with that, because most of the water used for our households gets dumped on the ground outside, which you probably like that. But,
Doesn't mean I like it. You know.
It's
part of it. It's part
it
of
supports the beauty in our valley. We use a lot in agriculture. We use a lot in landscaping. But if you're looking at housing, most of the water that gets used by a household is for outdoor landscaping, and that's something that we can limit it in multifamily housing. They usually have smaller yards, less landscaping, and the landscaping is usually managed with systems that are on timers, and people aren't turning the sprinklers and leaving them on for 2 hours.
Water that goes into our closed system now goes through our water processing facility, and it gets reused again. So,
Yeah, absolutely. Just one more thing I wanted to mention really quickly. I want to commend Logan City, because the stuff the task force recommended, Logan's doing all that stuff. You're the leaders on this. You're sophisticated when it comes to this kind of stuff. You have a great planning department. You thought about this. Your planning commission's thought about this. Your council's thought about this. And you're doing all of that stuff. You're shouldering more of the load, more than your share even, in our county. And I want to thank you for that. Thank you for doing that. But one thing I just would like to consider, and this didn't come out of the task force directly, but came from some discussions we had afterward, something that maybe Logan should consider is, what can you do to incentivize or encourage more student housing? Because, and specifically student housing on campus. Because I know that Logan has a problem with fewer homeowners and many, many rentals in your community. A lot of those are being used by students. A lot of those are single-family homes that maybe otherwise might be used by a family, but instead are being used by students, sometimes multiple students. For one, that's not the most efficient use of that space to have them in there, including water and the landscaping. But imagine what would happen if we had a surplus of student housing. If on campus there was so much student housing available that the prices were cheaper. That would encourage students to stay on campus. That would draw them out of maybe the single-family homes around campus where they've been renting basements or have a converted home.
Yeah.
And that would then open up those residences for families. And most of the time, I think those are houses that would end up being more affordable. They're older houses, they're smaller houses that have been converted for student housing. But if we could convert them back into single-family residences, I think that would be a win-win for the students and for Logan City.
David, the only thing I'll tell you is, having worked at Utah State for 37 years, I know exactly how incredibly difficult it is to build student housing. Because it has to be, it's a revenue-driven, and the state doesn't want to pay for it, and it doesn't happen easily.
Yeah.
And
I know it will be a challenge.
No, it's huge. And I think that while it would be amazingly wonderful for the university to do it, I think that we would have to create some pathways through the legislative hurdles that they face.
And that was my thought too, that with them being a state university, the path to that, I think, would be for us to convince the state that we have a need and that they have the resources to help us with that.
And a responsibility.
It would take some heavy lifting on their part.
Yeah, we'd have to create.
May I just make a comment?
You bet.
That's exactly what we tried to do with the campus residential zoning that we did around the university, and indeed it did create more student housing. But what we're finding is that investors come in, buy those houses in the Adams neighborhood, and they can make a lot of money turning them into rentals for whomever, students or others. And I know it frustrates the neighborhood, but it's economics. And, again, maybe there needs to be, a legislative solution with no deduction for a second home, or where it's a business or something like that. But that was exactly what we tried to do with the campus residential zone, and it has not, we certainly have students living in those areas, but it's the pressure. Families try and come in and buy a home, and the investors beat them out because they're making more money by turning it into student housing or rentals. So
And I do
that's
think,
all.
sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, Mayor, but I do think also we did do campus residential specifically to put more students closer to campus and hopefully with a higher density. I mean, it is a higher density than anywhere else in the city. But I think you have to also factor in, it was sort of like a cluster because we made that decision just about the time the university started to grow. So that extra housing just got gobbled up, and the regular housing that students were still using in the neighborhoods was still being used.
Yeah.
So you've got not only our growth in the county of people who are living, working here, you have the student growth that is sometimes even at a higher level than the growth of the general population. So it's hard.
Yeah.
If you could just say, okay, Utah State,
Built this.
this is you're capped at 15K or something like that, which you can't do, then you could begin to try and alleviate some of that in a different way. But if you've got, you do this and they do this, and you do this and they do this, it's a little hard.
Yeah. I don't want to take any more of your time, but I just want to give a shout out to Mayor Daines, and I want to thank her for encouraging me to start this task force. She's one of the first leaders I talked about this. John Drew, of course, has been a leader, but Mayor Daines was one of the ones who suggested that we start this task force and form it in the first place. So thank you, Mayor Daines.
Great.
I have a question for Sandy.
See if I have an answer.
You're not off the hook yet. First of all, I want to compliment you and David and the rest. I thought this report was fascinating, and I read everything, and there's lots to talk about on it, so it's a good point to begin. Now, I want to just add two little things.
Okay.
You talked about 85% of the population growth is internal. Natalie Dockner with the Ken Gardner Institute, she made a presentation last year. She said our population growth from within has leveled off. Our birth rate has dropped, and it is coming in from out of town. I can't argue that. I just want to bring you up that at least there's a differing opinion on that.
Well, and that was as of 2020 also, and things have changed in so many ways over the last 2 years. So,
Okay. The bigger point I wanted to make is that you referred to density. Now that's a swear word to a lot of the people sitting here. Dale, it was a couple of years ago, but density is just evil, and those people that live in them are evil too, and they destroy our communities.
Those people.
So as I look around, yeah, it's those people.
Yeah,
I'm
seriously.
glad I'm not one of those people, of course.
I was one of those people.
You could be one of those people.
Yeah, but anyway.
Tommy could be one of those people, so
Well, I will,
at some point.
So as I look around, okay, you got three types of homes. You got trophy homes. And people build these things. Nobody can afford them anymore, but yeah, we're still building those things.
Somebody can afford them.
Yeah, some,
Our children can't get into those things at all. Okay, so we got three types of homes. Trophy homes, spec homes, right? And then you have the apartment blocks. I don't see, I have a nice home, I have a nice yard, but one of these days I can't do it anymore. The apartment quality is not good. There's a few that have done better. But in some of the presentations on housing and so forth at Utah League, they talk about that building housing that is in between those sectors.
Yes.
More interesting multifamily, high density, more interesting.
Or even a higher quality.
Higher quality.
Yes.
And that's hard to legislate, as we talked about with some housing projects here. But there are other communities. I mean, Daybreak has some examples that we need to somehow either encourage through zoning or educate. The builders will do the simplest thing to make the highest profit quickly. I understand. I worked for one of those.
Pencil, pencil, pencil.
yeah.
Pardon?
Pencil, pencil, pencil.
Pencil. So maybe that's another chapter in your report as to how to create garden homes. And I could talk about this ad nauseum, and I won't, but it is something that we ought to talk about, because we won't be able to afford the trophy homes, or most of us won't be able to. The housing that has been built in our community, meaning high-density housing, is the reason that people don't want it in their neighborhood, because it's not as attractive or interesting. So I want you to just think about that.
And one of the things that I didn't go into, but the builders and the developers that were on our committee, they basically said it's not a free market for housing. We will build whatever people will buy, but we can only build what we're allowed to build in a lot of different municipalities. And so I think you're right on, and that was one of the things that I kind of alluded to was, as a planning commissioner, a planning code, if we could allow some kind of incentives. Let's say this open spaces bond passes and there is money, much like the RAPS tax, there's going to be a committee that will decide who gets that money. Well, maybe the city of Logan could say to a developer, okay, if you use these higher quality on your apartment buildings and put a nice open area like Daybreak, we'll give some incentive to that. I mean, there's so many facets to how it can be developed. I think that, and you all talked about the infrastructure and the resources, we're just beginning, and people that are a lot smarter than me are able to have input and figure out some of those things. So we really appreciate the things that you say.
And it might take incentives from a municipality, but the trade-off would be we'd get higher quality, we'd get more, how do you say, durable?
Yes.
More resilient housing that is not just...
They're going to still look good in 15, 20 years.
So,
And
for whatever it's worth. Thank you for...
so thank you for your time, and I neglected to mention David.
Can I answer your question, Tom?
Oh, yeah.
When we first sat down with this, and we've all read all the Ken Gardner Institute public policies reports, and they say Utah this, Utah that. And we said, if we're going to be credible, we really need this to have a Cache Valley focus. So we imposed on the folks down at Ken Gardner Institute, tell us about Cache Valley. So here's one thing. Future growth between now and 2060, 85% internal growth from families. The same pattern. A lot different than most of the rest of Utah. How many units, project how many housing units need to be built between now and 2030? 11,600 additional housing units here in Cache Valley in 7 years. That's the Ken Gardner Institute speaking about Cache Valley. So,
and Cache Valley could be, it is a different demographic than this state. I know that. Thank you.
Hey, good afternoon or good evening. Sean Milne, County's Economic Development Director. I'm approaching the mic for two reasons. One, with that hat on, and I'm looking at Karina because she and I were able to tour an Ivory Homes development in South Jordan just a couple of months ago that I think addresses a couple of things. One, your affordability of the garden kind of home, and the university housing. The city utilized some of their set-aside that you have to treat as a restricted fund for any of your RDA money that's been newly approved, where it's set aside 10%. They were seeing that rack up, and because they were in a unique situation where they were pooling this money but didn't really have many places to place it, they worked with Ivory Homes, who had built a development about 10 years prior, and said, how can we create some deed restricted for public employee housing that doesn't look like the projects, doesn't feel like it's set aside or separate. And they took 3 infill lots that had homes. They were existing inventory, they were older. They were 3 lots of about 3 acres each, so about 9 acres. And they took 3 domiciles and they built 50. It was not cheap product. And I think that there is a very workable scenario. I'd invite you to participate and have a greater in-depth conversation if this intrigues you, how they set aside some deed restricted for 50 years, some of those parcels, not all 50, that were available for teachers and city employees specifically in that municipality that I think could help address both the student housing. They have a say on the construction materials because they're contributing some funding, right? So there's that I approached the Mike as the Economic Development Director to say, hey, I think there's actually a way to address some of these great points brought up tonight. But now the second part. I'm also a Logan City resident. The county created this position about 1.5 years ago, and I was fortunate enough to be offered the opportunity to take this Kirk Jensen #2 kind of role. By the way, he's fantastic. You all should be very, very proud of him and how his peers throughout the state think of how he approaches the job. So kudos to Logan City. And only because the council addressed you, I'm one of those people. For 7 months, I lived in a hotel as a middle-aged professional male with my wife, who we were like working separately for the time being because I moved here to take the employment, okay? I was one of those people that kept losing. And I use that term intentionally because in a previous life, I had been in a similar seat to yours where folks would use that term somewhat disparagingly to talk about people in their community, people outside of their community that weren't here yet but wanted to be. And what I'm saying to you as a Logan City resident, thank you for having a different approach regarding the topic that we're here for tonight. Because if you hadn't taken a different approach, I probably wouldn't have ended up in a home that ended up being a Logan City resident. So I'm one of those people from outside the valley, not born and raised here, but spent a considerable amount of time, my entire adulthood, in Utah. But had you had a different perspective about making room at the inn, to use a biblical analogy here, like I would have been sent down the road somewhere else, right? So I appreciate that you already seem to have a better mindset than some about having inventory that allows somebody as a working professional who couldn't win bids after bids after bids, but finally, because of your approach to housing already, and because of your excellent Planning and Zoning Commission, like you made that opportunity available. So sometimes those people aren't just poor people, or people of a different way of life. Sometimes it is a working professional in those years of their life, a dink, dual income, no kids at home. What I mean by that is in tourism circles or economic development, that typically means a pretty good disposable income, right? But I think one of the oft overlooked elements that this Housing Crisis Task Force also addresses is it's not just entry-level homeowners. Even the McMansions or those lifestyle homes being super expensive, what opportunities are you not allowing, or other cities in our beautiful county not allowing, because the inventory being so limited means that builders can expect and demand high prices, right? What working professionals, and what does that say about your economic prosperity in future years? What are you limiting, or other cities limiting, by not building enough inventory that even working professionals and not just entry-level home buyers unable to move into your community, right? So there's a lot to unpack there. Some of it was subtly intended to be delivered. I hope it came across polite nonetheless. But thank you, as a Logan City resident and as new as I am, I appreciate you offering the Housing Crisis Task Force the opportunity to come and present tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate it. Thanks, Sandy. If there's no further comments at this time, we will move on with the rest of our agenda. We have a lot to absorb, a lot to think about. It's hard to sort of just talk about it in random.
Yeah. I think Cowboy Partners brought some of those really nice apartments with one of their plans.
Yeah, they did. Yes, they did.
Thank you for expanding and allowing that discussion.
Yep, absolutely. Before, I'm going to take a point of privilege. Before we move on to discussion about winter parking, I would like to give Paul Lindhart a few minutes to talk about road closures and parking and in and out.
What are we excited about?
I've heard a rumor that there may be a burger joint selling burgers in the near future at 400 North
Somewhere.
Main Street. You probably saw the press release. They plan to open tomorrow at In-N-Out Burger.
Pop-up shop.
And I just was asked to give kind of an update how they've worked with the city for their plans to try and mitigate the potential for a lot of attention and traffic. They've submitted to the city through the permitting process that their goal, they have plans to accommodate a lot of cars on site on the property, the parking lot of that shopping center. And then after that, should it be necessary, they've put a plan into place to try and control traffic going north on 100 East from that point. To their credit, I think they've planned hopefully well above and beyond what is necessary, but their goal is to be ahead of it and not react to a chaotic situation, which I appreciate
And so does Chief Jensen.
very much. Their permit they applied for was up to 30 days. Again, their goal is to have that in place, the ability to put that in place much longer than needed. If that enthusiasm for a double-double dies down quick enough, they will take down their traffic control as quickly as they can and not keep it all 30 days. So there's an update.
Can you explain what the traffic control is at this
Yeah,
point?
so as their drive-through line potentially spills out of their property onto the road, it would be to use the west side of 100 East for a southbound queuing lane.
West side of 100 East, southbound. Okay. Like behind where,
And not close any roads or any travel lanes. They would still have two-way traffic all the way along 100 East. They do have the potential for the first 5 days of their opening to extend that 100 East to 800 North, East to 200 East, North to 10th North, West to Main Street.
It must be
If
a
needed.
version.
My understanding is that length of line would give about 5 to 6 hour wait to get to the store. At that point, they encourage people to head to Riverdale.
at
So,
that point, they could go to
It would be
Riverdale and come
faster to
back.
go to Riverdale, yes.
and again, that's all in place if needed.
Oh,
Not-
and here I thought maybe they were restricting parking because school was starting on Second East between 8th and 10th North.
No, that's not the reason.
School does start this week, too.
I heard
But
that the
school is
facility,
starting.
It is, and that's why that portion around 10th North only goes for 5 days, so that won't be available or in place once school comes
School
into
starts
session.
Thursday.
Wednesday, the 24th.
Oh, it starts a week later than the county.
Correct.
Okay, my grandkids aren't going to school Thursday, that's why I was
Yeah,
like.
my kids are too, but anyway, I just want to give an update. If you hear comments, see comments.
So will,
We are
that's the-
prepared.
will
yeah.
they manage the traffic?
Yes, to their credit, they have two traffic control contractors in place, one for on-site in their parking lot and one for all in the right-of-way, to have certified traffic control operators. They will have up to almost 50 flaggers along that route, one stationed at every single driveway to each home to make sure driveways are not blocked, people can get in and out, and intersections along the way.
Holy moly.
They've done this before, apparently.
I think they have.
Wow. So how are they addressing, I'm sorry to ask all the questions,
You
but
bet.
how are they addressing the left-hand turns by between where the car wash used to end and the building just to the north of it? The Chinese restaurant?
I'm not following you.
South of Mandarin Garden.
Yeah, south of Mandarin Garden.
Yeah, off of Main Street.
So any car that enters into that block, they will be directed to the line on First East. If people come to the store to dine in, they will have a separate queuing area and line. And they said if that gets too full, they'll direct people and say you'll need to come back later, because they won't let the dining in queue line spill out of their property.
But there won't be any impact on Main Street or.
The only impact they anticipate on Main Street and Fourth Orange is they have put out message boards on those two roads and entrances directing them to First East to get in the line.
Okay, so
Yeah,
people
they
won't-
won't be able to enter the line anywhere except First East. And they will have their team, their all-star team they're called, on site directing that.
Okay. Well, that'll alleviate a lot of the concerns that people have had about its location.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's personally the most thorough traffic control plan I've seen for a store opening.
Ever.
Yeah.
History of restaurant openings, it'll be swamped for 2 weeks and then boom.
And they don't anticipate, they plan for more than they think will happen. And they said that's what they usually see. Within 5 to 14 days, it's dying down, it's going. We did talk about the fact that they'll have the opening and it may die down. Then they have USU students returning, it could go back up, die down. And then the Labor Day holiday weekend could be big. So we talked about all those.
Yeah, and they're sequential.
Yeah, they've notified CVTD, school district, affected parties. That's the update.
Awesome, thank you.
Thank you.
We can I'll stay home. That's all I'm gonna say.
I heard,
I'm just gonna
You want it animal style,
Yeah, I
that's,
was
just
gonna go
remember
to-
that.
I don't-
Hamburger animal style.
I don't eat animals.
What do you think beef is?
I don't want to eat I don't eat hamburgers.
anecdote is that the opening over in Colorado was
They'll
like
have grilled cheese.
4-hour wait.
Yeah, it was a 4-hour wait. Yeah.
4-hour wait. I
Okay.
wouldn't do that.
Well, I'm excited that we get a new business in
Yeah.
town.
Parking.
And I'm excited that it's a business that has planned that thoroughly. And I look forward to everyone being able to have that In-N-Out burger they've been waiting for. And we're going to move on to winter parking. So, 2 meetings ago, we brought up the subject of winter parking at the request of some council members. They wanted to discuss our options with respect to winter parking. And at that meeting, we heard the history of the winter parking ordinances, which I believe everyone knows, and if we get desperate buses over there. We also received a very, very thorough note from Paul today regarding aspects of winter parking with respect to snow removal. So I don't have any agenda for this. I want us to decide where we think we would like to go. At that point, we would have to either change an ordinance, not change an ordinance, amend an ordinance, or whatever, and then we have to go through that process. So this is an open discussion. I'll let anybody go first that wants to. There's Ernesto. I can look at him.
Look at Ernesto.
Anybody who'd like to go first?
So I sent out to the members of council just a consolidated kind of the ordinances for the major cities in northern Utah and here in Cache Valley.
Great information, by the
Was
way.
surprised that, with the exception of Ogden city itself, almost every other community has winter parking restrictions from anywhere from November 1st to April 1st.
Most were more restrictive than Logan's.
Yeah. I mean, North Logan is from the 15th of November to the 28th of February. Theirs is a little bit shorter than ours, but I will just say I was surprised that was the pattern.
We're not an outlier.
We're not an outlier, because I think in some of the comments I've gotten from citizens, it led me to believe we might be an outlier, but our current ordinance is pretty in line with not that we have to be exactly like our neighbors, but it does seem that because we're all in a cold weather climate, in looking at some of their county or their city council minutes related to some of these, a lot of it was the things that were discussed by Paul, just in terms of how difficult it is if cars are parked there and you plow around them, that people have that expectation the next day that you're going to come and clear the street to accommodate the fact that now there's piles of snow. So we're not the only city that has kind of discussed this and faced it. So that's my comment.
Paul shared some great information about snowfall during those months. We had a 10-year survey that kind of outlined which months we have to deal with. So I thought that was great information as well too. One snow in November and one in March.
Yeah, but that one in November can
Can be really big.
big
Yeah,
one.
can be really big. So,
The one in March, probably not so much, but the one in November can be the start of a big winter.
yeah.
or the only snow we get for a month and a half.
Yeah. I thought it was interesting that our average was about 18
Snowstorms.
over 10 years, 18 a year.
Yeah.
It's really interesting.
Anything?
Well, I appreciated what Paul said, and I think we ought to sustain that, what we're doing, I think. I haven't heard a strong argument for not
For
having
changing
it.
it.
And I appreciate what Amy said.
Yeah.
There's a lot of problems that occur when the parking is there and the snow occurs. And every place I've lived, they've had
Yeah.
restrictions.
I think with the information that Amy provided for us, the information that Paul provided, it kind of reinforced for me that we're doing the right thing.
The only thing that I thought of with respect to winter parking is, do we want to not allow any parking on collector roads, like 2nd East, 6th East, so that they can clear those so traffic can, I mean, it's one thing to drive a block
Yeah.
on a snow-covered road. It's quite another thing to drive with 22 other cars on 2nd East and hope they all stop.
Yeah. good point.
So that was the only option.
Outside of like extending the time that they're not allowed to park?
No,
on the
I would
street?
just say, I would add to the ordinance saying that these particular streets do not allow any winter parking.
Oh, so
Zero
even
permits.
No permits
No
on those
permits,
streets.
no nothing.
I think that's a reasonable thing.
How many currently do we have that have permits on those streets?
I don't know the answer to that. I just thought of that today. I was just thinking about that today and didn't ask Russ. But
Because I think there are a couple on 2nd, aren't there? 2nd East?
I don't know, right now there's,
Making permits.
somebody has 6, 7 cars at one house.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. But they could park around the corner. I mean, they still would have a permit, they just could not park on that
Yeah, so
collector road.
they'd walk a block at the most.
Yeah,
Half a block.
but that would be my only,
Do most of our parking restriction complaints come from near campus, or do they come all throughout the city?
Russ, can you answer that?
I can.
Oh, okay.
What are you doing this?
We get most of our complaints through the areas around the west part of campus and the east part of campus. We do get an occasional outlier throughout the city as snow builds up or vehicles are left out and create a barrier to safe travel. I was also going to mention, if you don't mind, I think consistency is probably what I think is the most important thing as you consider winter parking. My 13 years here with the city, this topic has come up time and time and time again. And we're like an amoeba. We kind of fold in and kind of give in this area and then take back in that area. And so we've tried a lot of different things over the 13 years, but none of them seem to impact the overall problem to a point that we find a solution. We give in one area, we take away from another, we take away from one, we give to another, and it just seems to be, when we give a little extra here, we offend somebody else. And so we're constantly trying to make it better for the people that are complaining about their specific issues this year. So again, to create consistency in how we manage our parking, I think that gives strength to the people that are, even if it's not in your favor, it still gives you strength because you know the rules and you make every effort to obey the rules as they are. So consistency. Thank you.
So,
Let me ask, Chief has sat down now, but when you say consistency, are you saying the same rules for all streets?
The same rules year after year after year.
Okay.
So we don't have to reinvent the wheel every year and keep people guessing.
All right, I agree with that.
so how would you like to proceed?
So one thing I did notice is the information that Amy shared with us, Ogden is probably the only one that has a university in it, right? Is that correct? Was that in this list? I didn't see.
Yeah, Ogden does not have a ban on overnight parking.
Yeah.
They have a ban after snow, but they don't have an outright period of time where they don't allow overnight street parking.
Did we ever pull back the restriction on near the campus where most of the complaints come from?
What do you mean by pull back?
You mentioned that sometimes we pull back the restriction, or we take back the restriction, or we add, or.
We've done a number of things. One specifically that I think about is we simply decided not to enforce unless there was a weather event forecast. Again, what that does is it creates questions in the minds of those that are attempting to park perhaps where they shouldn't. Should I or shouldn't I? Is this okay? Is it not okay? Is it forecast? Is it not forecast? So we went away from that because it didn't work well. And again, if consistency is what people are after, they say day after day after day, I park right here. Well, it's a snow event day and you can't. So it's tough.
So it didn't work well because it was harder to implement, or it didn't work well
No.
because you have more offenders, or?
Well, with due respect, and I don't like to highlight this, but we can write tickets all day long. I mean, people violate. They do. They take their chances, and it's unfortunate. But we're tasked with not the rulemaking, but the rule enforcement. And so enforcing rules that are questionable year after year after year, people can't get used to the notion that this is how we do business. And I think that maybe sometimes they fall prey to that inability to be sure what the rules are, despite our efforts in social media and those kinds of things. So I wish it was an easy fix. I wish one of us had a magic idea that could make it happen, but I don't know what that is. So the only thing I can come back to is hoping for that consistency, as difficult as it may be. At least people know the rules. And then they get to make a decision. Do I take a chance or do I not take a chance? So, anyway.
Refresh me too, Chief. Usually the first couple weeks, you guys write warnings more than write tickets. Like
Always.
as people get used to the idea that, oh, that's right.
Always.
The parking enforcement is in effect at this point in time.
Yeah, and what follows those is angered response. What am I supposed to do? How am I going to live? Where am I going to park? And we try to talk people through all those difficult scenarios. There's not always a great solution because we're all wanting to park within 10 yards of our front door, but that's not always possible. So yes, we do that, and we anticipate doing that again this year. So.
Well, I know Paul had indicated he thought we might have the ability to shorten it just based on when snowfall is, but I don't know if there's
A week on each end.
a week on each end is going to
It
make
makes
a
a
big
difference.
difference to
Yeah.
change an ordinance at this point in time.
I agree.
Yeah, that's kind of where I was leaning last time we met, was like, yeah, we could shorten it on both ends, but with the information provided, I think we're pretty close. I think November 15th to March 1st is pretty close where we need to be. So.
Ernesto?
Well, currently our ordinance is through March 15, isn't it?
Right,
Not March 1st.
right.
So
You said first,
Yeah,
but it's 15.
we're close, yeah.
Yeah.
I'd be open to shortening the end of it. Maybe looking at what everybody's doing and our weather patterns, I guess maybe not so much as shortening it at the beginning of
In
it,
November, but
maybe at the end.
cutting off 2 weeks in March.
I'd be open to that discussion.
When's the beginning date?
Beginning date is November 15.
And realistically, people, as Chief just said, sometimes need that extra couple of weeks to get used to the idea. So
Yeah.
if we moved it to December 1st, then you'd be having.
Yeah. But you're,
No, he's only talking about moving it in March.
No, I'm saying if we did move it later, at the start, I think it would.
We'd still have the
it
2
would
weeks
almost
of warming
react
people up
If
for
we're
it,
going to
yeah.
keep it in, it would give people much more time to get used to it. So,
Doesn't matter a whole lot to me.
Yeah.
For March 1st, March 15th, you get enough solar radiation during that day that it's going
Yeah.
to clear off pretty good.
Well, our path forward is we either say we like the ordinance the way it is and we're going to leave it and we're done with the discussion. Or we say we want to change the ordinance and then we go through the process of having a public hearing and change the ordinance. So,
Let's
which would you
leave it.
prefer to do? Amy?
I would prefer to leave it the way we have it.
Tom?
Leave it.
Ernesto?
If we are done with the discussion, I'm okay leaving it, but if we want to keep discussing, I'd be open to shortening it to the beginning of March.
So you'd like to change the ordinance?
Yes, if we
Yeah.
have more people.
I would go shorten it to 1st of March too.
You are the big
Yeah, you
decision
get to
maker.
decide.
I would go with just leaving it the way it is.
There we go.
3-2.
Okay, that's what we do.
Um,
And that is acceptable, so.
Okay.
Yeah,
Is that acceptable?
I do not,
Yeah,
I do
no,
not have a
I
problem.
think
Mark's
seeing
going to
all-
resign from council.
I know, I'm out of here. No, I think that's,
It's,
yeah,
yeah,
they're
it's
both
not
good, they're
that
both
big
good
of a
options.
thing.
yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, I appreciate the fact that we had the discussion. Thank you, Amy, for all that information and for sharing it with us. I think that if anyone can contact you if they would like to see it, right?
Absolutely, happy to share it.
Okay.
Yes, thank you for doing that.
The last thing on council business is a planning commission update, and I was traveling, but I have a magical voice over there on the side that tells me what happened in planning commission. Cytiva brought forward their administration building proposal, which will be on the highway, part of their expansion, and that was approved, and there was a continued discussion on our new mixed-use ordinance. And hopefully they will get to a point where they're comfortable with it and send it our way. So we'll see it sometime in the future.
And hopefully we'll be able to maybe integrate some of what we just heard from the county report into, see how that,
I think we tried.
yeah, how that mixes with it.
I think we tried with the changes, so I hope that it worked. Anyway, we'll move now to action items. We're a little bit late, but our first action item is a public hearing on budget adjustments. Rich?
Request to appropriate $11,269 of funds that were donated by Mayor Daines toward the Public Arts Program. This was a promise that she made in coordination with a raise that was given this fiscal year. Request to appropriate $183,792 of funds that were received from the sale of a park toward the design of 3 new parks, which was also in accordance with the commitment that the city made to use those funds toward our Parks and Recreation program. Request to appropriate $75,770 for after-school programs. This is a new grant, which is terrific. $4,363 for police and public works reimbursements associated with the cruise in, and a request to appropriate $14,300, which were donated to our police department for investigative equipment.
Any questions of Rich at this time? This is a public hearing. If there's any member of the public that wishes to speak to this, please come to the microphone, state your name, and take 3 minutes or less.
Dr. Gail B. Yost. I live on First East and here in Logan. I wanted to know which, the first question I have is which of the park properties are being sold?
That was the sale of the Garf Gardens plot or the development off First East that happened a couple of years ago with that development. So when that piece of ground was sold, the agreement was that would go back to additional park use in the city.
That's
And
what I
they
was.
complied with all of the restrictions that were within the deed of sale, which was that they had to have the townhouses under construction at a certain point before we would allow them to take ownership of that property.
I understand that. I'm just concerned that this park that we had for years, and I know when it was about to be changed because my daughter is 36 and she was in utero. It was a park that was used a long time, and I know that we can't take back the egress from that parking lot onto First East, which is sad because that was part of what made the park so great, is that children could use it safely, and I think
The
it's...
driveway on First East is still there. Garf Gardens is still there in the driveway.
Garf Gardens, but it was a park for a very long time, from in the late 70s. It was a park. And that daughter was born in 1986. And my children, who were older than her, my older children, used to go, and even in the wintertime, used to have picnics there, used to have snowball fights and snow forts and sledding. And they used to have, I know, soccer league games at that particular site until it was changed to a gardens. And it was that year that she was born that we had won as a community, as a neighborhood, we had won the battle, at least we thought we had, that it would not be changed at all, that we would keep Garf Gardens. But the following year, the mayor at the time decided that he was going to decide to ignore what the city council had said the year before, and he actually dug up and the garden and put over it asphalt and made it a fait accompli. And because of that, he did it in November. And when he did it in November, we had a really bad snowfall. And because of this really bad snowfall, the asphalt actually did not sit well and came up into the area and was all crackled up because of the snowfall. And it had to be redone in the spring. So I'm just I'm concerned that if it can be done to this park, what can happen later if a different mayor wants to sell park property again?
The only restriction that we have, and I think that Craig could speak to that, the mayor has the right to sell property, but the mayor also consults council if it is over a certain size. Is that not correct?
If they're going to sell a significant parcel of property, which by ordinance says $100,000 or an acre in size or larger, then the city has to hold a public hearing and would consent with the council. The mayor is the chief executive officer for the city, and she's authorized to sell property, to make those decisions.
So
I understand that too. I knew that was the case. I'm concerned that a mayor with a different agenda in the future could actually end up selling some of our property, even after consulting.
Well,
the
the
mayor
other
could
thing-
still have that.
I know,
that-
Gail, but that's not, we're trying to talk about this particular budget adjustment.
I
so-
understand, but that question comes up now because you are selling that.
It's sold.
It's sold already, I understand, yes. It is being sold because it is no longer considered a park anyway. And we could lose other parks that are very important to our neighborhoods, to our families. And I would like to just make a statement that I think it's important that we yes, we have new money for new parks, but we also need to make sure that our parks are taken care of and kept for, especially if we have this higher density. The higher the density, the more we need parks. The higher the density, the more we need green space, because people under high density usually lose some of their social skills, especially if it's higher than three stories. And you don't have to argue with me about that, because that's something that is in the materials anytime you want to look about high density with social skills. This is not talking about crime. This is talking about being neighborly and being caring about other people.
So Gail, I will say on my behalf, as long as I am on the council, we will not sell any parkland that of existing parks, and I hope that we can build more. I can't speak for people that will be elected in the future, but you know, as I know, that we get to choose. And so we need to be voices in the future, and we can't decide the future today, but we can do the best we can. And I appreciate the comments.
I just needed to make those comments.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Anyone else? Bring it back to the council for action.
I'll move we accept Resolution 2235 regarding the budget adjustment.
I'll second the motion.
It's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We'll move now to a public hearing that was continued from August 2nd. Mark, sorry. You waited a long time for this. And you
Look
wore
at
a
that
tie.
nice suit that man is wearing.
You wore a tie today.
Wasn't worth it. No, I'm just kidding.
We're not worth it? Come
No,
on.
I'm tired of wearing this tie today. I've been at meetings all
I
day.
was gonna say, you were at UAMPS all day, like rocking it and representing the city of Logan, so I'm glad you were wearing a suit.
I think you discussed this quite a bit with Steve last meeting about just our costs have gone up astronomically, and this is, in my mind, a pretty conservative bump compared to what our costs are.
Any questions of Mark?
No.
Since I was not here on the 2nd, I don't know why you continued it, but.
Oh, because it had to be a public
Had to be
hearing. and
It was
wasn't
neglected to be
public.
noticed.
It's not noticed properly, yeah.
Okay. If we don't have any questions, I'll let you sit down. That was great. See
Well,
you.
I'm going to come right back.
Stay right there. Just stay right there.
Okay.
Don't move.
This is a public hearing. If there are any members of the public who wish to speak to this, please come forward and state your name. Take 3 minutes or
Everybody
less.
come running.
Seeing no one, I'll bring it back for an action by the council.
So before we do that, I just want to make sure people are clear that this is connection fees for commercial buildings.
All construction.
Yeah, all new
Anything,
construction.
residential.
It's not existing customers,
Right.
it's new construction, because I did get a
If you want
question
to get
about
hooked up to
raising.
power, you're going to pay these higher.
Yeah, so it's just new connections,
New
not,
connections.
thank you.
Yeah,
I would move acceptance of resolution 22-30.
I'll second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Now we will have Mark come up again, because we're going to consider a proposed resolution for Red Mesa.
So this is pretty much identical to the discussion we had a few council meetings ago about the Steel Solar project. The commercial operation date had been pushed due to getting parts and pieces in to build it, and the price had gone up, and this is almost identical. The price has gone up, and the commercial operation date is being pushed back just due to supply issues and higher costs and, just the stuff we're used to hearing
Yes,
every
but the
day.
sun keeps shining.
The sun keeps shining, fortunately, so we're good in that sense.
Any further questions of Mark? This is not a public hearing, so.
I would move acceptance of resolution 22-36 as well.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any further questions or discussion items? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? We'll move now to our workshop
It's
items.
going to change whether we vote for it or not, right?
And Rich gets a whole entire page.
I know, like, how many trees?
The
Just for
whole
you this
entire
meeting.
page.
They could have taken the electronic.
Yeah. Is this a long
So
discussion?
we're going to let you do A and B.
Okay. A, we have two items to consider, a request to appropriate $51,840 of EMS funds, so our EMS ambulance fund, toward the part-time program. We had a grant that funded this part-time program for quite some time. However, we have lost that funding, and so we are requesting to appropriate the EMS funds toward this purpose. It is important to us as a city. The second is as a request to appropriate $4,500 for a neighborhood improvement grant that was received to create construction murals. So you're familiar with that, but I think it's murals that hide construction.
Posters
Well,
to
no,
go
they're going to
around
be
construction.
art installations on construction sites as part of our public art program.
City
And they're going to
sites?
include
Yes.
city and
Yeah.
they're going to
Okay.
include citizen involvement.
Particularly the plaza and the library.
In the library, yeah. That was a great idea.
You
I
can
like that.
participate. in
Yes,
it.
it's
That's-
public
They
participation.
want stick figures, I'll participate.
They'll take them, it's part of the participation process.
Art is not your forte, all right?
Any questions on A, otherwise I'll
Yeah. Art
hurry
with-
on to
You
B.
just do artwork with
So
numbers, right?
the funding, we're moving funding we're moving funding for the part-time from our EMS.
Yeah, it's just from our revenues. We're just saying, since, our revenues will have to support it. And we watch those very carefully. It is a little bit nerve-wracking because it's a new fund. We don't have a lot of history, but we think it sustains it.
Okay.
And obviously, it's our commitment that no fund can have a negative balance, so we'll watch it very carefully.
So this is money already earned by them, or are we
Earned
appropriating?
and to be earned
Okay,
over time.
so, okay.
It's
So-
just from the general transports and responses that they perform and the fees that we charge for those services.
Okay, thank you.
And our collections are being okay as far as supporting, like, all that?
Our collections are doing well. I'm always concerned, but the chief watches those very carefully, as do I, and thus far they've materialized as we anticipated. And it's in excess of what we're appropriating, which is always good.
Okay.
So item B is all the carry forwards from previous years. So these are appropriated funds that council appropriated in previous fiscal years. Those projects were not completed during fiscal year 22, and so we're requesting to appropriate or to carry those forward and council to reappropriate those funds. For the most part, these are large projects, large purchases. However, this year, we have given a little more latitude to departments in what they request because of supply chain issues and other difficulties associated with COVID that have kind of delayed equipment coming in. An example of that is our IT equipment for $33,286. Typically, this would be order on Wednesday, get it on Friday, install it on Monday.
Or your wildland radios.
It's probably a little longer than that. It takes a lot more effort to install. But typically, it's a very fast process. Well, now the lead time is a year or something. So it's just part of the world we live in. So several of these smaller ones throughout are associated with those items. So I'm not going to hit all of these. I'll just hit some of the big ones that rhyme with millions. But if we look in the water and sewer, there are several, there's rate studies and there's some other rolling stock. Again, rolling stock are our vehicles that we've ordered and
They just haven't shown up yet.
they're a year out. We ordered them a year ago. They'll get here 2025 probably. But a request for appropriate $22,000,001. That's mostly for the water tank project that we're still working on. Down a little bit lower, you can see in the capital projects. Let's see, 4.3 million for curb gutter and street projects, 4.3 million for, Yeah, we do have kind of two different categories, 4.3 in both of them. That's just happenstance, but we have two different categories of funding that we use for curb, gutter, and streets projects. And then 14,634,000 for our library. There should be our fire station, yes there is, for 6.7 million, almost $7 million for the fire station as well.
So-
Large capital projects that are continuing on.
Can you tell me what the 4,000,007 for landfill capital is?
And I wish Isa was here to speak to that. Mostly that is the composting facility that was appropriated
Oh, that's
this
right.
last fiscal year.
The one that he's building next to the new sewer treatment plant.
Still
Okay, that makes
building
sense.
it. There is some for, I believe, the North Valley landfill for opening a new cell as well.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And the
But obviously, we'll
7,
hold off a little bit on some of those.
and that 7.6 for the sewer treatment, that's just outstanding things that have not yet been paid for that?
It is. So this one was a little unusual, but the state trusts no one. And so when we did a $150 million project, it required us to take all of the funding for that project and throw it in an account. And then they put their millions in that same account that we borrowed from the state of Utah. And so what is left is Logan City money, but it's stuck in this account until the project is completely wrapped up. Now it's substantially complete. It's running. It's working. And a lot of this is contingency that we did not use because Mark Nielsen was so good at running that project, as well as Madeline, who's running us with him. And so they did a very good job. So much of it's contingency we expect to get back. However,
You have to reallocate it.
yeah.
Okay.
So that's our hope.
So later you're going to show us, we're going to take it out of that project and put it back into the,
My hope is we just let it go away and it goes to reserves, and then
well, no, don't we have
hopefully
to?
we build the 4th bioreactor.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay.
So if you have any questions on any of these, so the process is we wait until the second meeting in August to bring these forward. The reason is we're still trying to calculate what is remaining. You know, even today we got several invoices for work that was performed in the prior year, so we have to post those back. Now, over the next 2 weeks, we'll probably come in and change some of these. Most of them will go down because we received invoices, therefore we don't need to carry them forward.
Right.
But it's substantially complete. And the reason we do that again is to make sure we actually tidied up everything. One of the ways Logan City got in trouble in 2000, or way back then, way back when we hit a recession, we carried forward funding that didn't exist because the revenues didn't come in, and also some of the expenses were posted back after the revenues were, or after the encumbrances were carried forward. So we don't carry forward these until we're nearly certain we've received everything, and we don't have council approval until we're very certain.
We appreciate that.
Could you explain that carry forward of reimbursement grants a little bit?
Absolutely. So a reimbursement grant, let's say we get a reimbursement grant for $100,000. We incur expenses and then we request reimbursement from the donor. We get these for lots of different types of things. I'm trying to think. Many of them are federal.
They just
bulletproof vest.
They just don't trust you with the money to
They
start
do not
with, right?
trust. And this is the way it typically is done. But bulletproof vest grant is a good example. We receive a grant to buy bulletproof vests. We don't get reimbursed until we receive the vest. And so in this case, these are the funds we've been awarded, but we haven't received goods and services yet. Therefore, we can't get reimbursed. So we're telling council, in this case, we're going to carry forward $9,533. We're requesting that because we haven't used those funds yet. We're anticipating we'll receive those vests, or many of them, in 2023, and we'll request reimbursement at that time.
Do you have to pay?
And we don't carry forward.
Yeah. Do you have to pay for them before they send them, and then we get reimbursed for them?
Yeah, receive them, make sure they're working properly, and some of these grants have pretty strict guidance. You'll recall the airshed grant, where we had to drill a 3-inch hole through the engine block of the engine.
That's right.
Then we had to cut the frame at a certain angle. We had to take pictures and then submit those, and they wouldn't reimburse us until we crossed every one of
We're
those
supposed to
tiles.
auction that opportunity
So
off
hopefully
for
we're
someone
not,
so
how are we
can get some
checking
extra
that the
money.
bulletproof vests really work? Or is that, that's something we're checking?
We don't want to know.
We don't want to.
Okay, any further questions?
I'm good with that.
Any other considerations this evening?
I just wanted to mention that, all right, sorry, I gotta pull up my email. Wilson Neighborhood is having an event.
Yes.
Help me with the date. The NEMA art truck is coming down for it.
24th.
24th of
Of August, yeah, it's like soon, sorry. I've got a different
I
email.
don't know if the 24th is right, but that's what sticks in my
It's
head.
like their
so.
neighbor, it's like a neighborhood, it's their neighborhood meeting thing.
There is a social tomorrow.
Is that, is it tomorrow?
Yeah, it's at 5:30.
Sorry, I thought I had printed it off, but I didn't. So I've just announced something that I don't have all the details on. But it looks pretty, it's like such a cool idea, I think, to bring the art truck down from the university and have activities and things, so. But it was Wilson, correct, that's doing it? Okay. Sorry.
Any
And
other?
it's at Merlin Olson Park.
What was that, Holly?
And it's at Merlin Olson Park.
Merlin Olson Park, thank you.
Anything else? We are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.